Brian, give them some more love and appreciation. Beautiful. Thank you. We're blessed. Good morning. I'm going to say good morning, Agape. Is that okay? I know this is the Soul Center, Orange County, but you know, I usually say good morning, Agape. So here we are. And you are Agape South in your own way, and that's fabulous. I'm delighted always to be here. Reverend Michael wanted to be sure to let you know that he sends his love to each and every one of you, sends his love and blessings, and is delighted that each of you is here. He actually also wanted me to remind you that there's the meditation retreat coming up that he's facilitating. Let's see, it starts on the 29th, on the Thursday at Joshua Tree. And if you want more information, you can go to the Agape website. I want to get that out of the way so that I don't forget. Because then I go back and he says, did you tell them? Well, okay. So, what we're talking about today is tune in to the living Christ and find out what's new. And what we teach and what we know in this teaching is that the Christ is within each of us. It's a consciousness. It came forward embodied as Jesus the Christ at the time that it happened. But I remember when I was young, and I wasn't raised, if any of you have heard me speak before, like with a whole Bible study thing or anything. I was raised very metaphysically. But I used to read the Bible on my own. And I used to feel sad that this being who clearly knew so much about compassion, tenderness, mercy, love, was about being on the planet as a healing consciousness. I felt something that I wasn't on the planet at the same time that he was. And that was when I was, I was early teenage years. So something in me had a longing, you understand, a longing to be aware of that Christed consciousness. So that's one reason why now I'm thrilled to be aware that it is within each of us, that a living consciousness never dies, and that it's alive, it incarnates itself over and over and over again, as every life, and as that beautiful Sadie is our newest incarnation, I just can't help pointing her out, but every being comes into this planet with the glow of the highest heaven. We all come in birthed of the Christ. You know, Eckhart likes to tell us, not Eckhart totally, but Eckhart, tells us that there is not one begotten of Christ, but one Father that continually begets itself, and that we are all sons and daughters of this Christ consciousness. I know that the way that I was raised, which was, think about this when I tell you, back in the early 60s, I know, a long time ago, but the way that my mother taught me, which was very radical for the times, was that Christ was the great example, not the great exception. Right. The great example, not the great exception. Yes. I remember her talking to me about that, and I was young, so I didn't, have a framework, a context to really, where was that going to land? But again, as an evolving consciousness, it's quite something to stand in the world today and to say, he was the great example. And not only that, as you may well know, you may not. I'm here to tell you. What the living Christ of our own being tells us is, greater things than this shall you do. Greater things. So he said that he came to heal the sick, raise the dead, to bring peace to those who are suffering. Isn't that interesting? I don't know if anybody else is sitting there saying, how the heck am I supposed to do that? But every time it comes around for me to speak about it, in my heart I'm thinking, wow, that's a big charge. that's not like a small little thing, I could come in here and talk to you about having a wonderful, magnificent, better life, which is what this teaching is about. This is not exclusive of that. But this is saying that in a certain way, in order to allow the better life for ourselves and the better life for every being that we know, the better life is going to come as we allow the Christ in our own nature to be made welcome at an even deeper level. And I want to say that it's a constant evolutionary process. It happens over and over and over again. I was thinking of what, I know I just misspoke. That's because I was distracted by thinking about what Reverend Michael says, because he says, it's not a one and done, you know. It's not like we get to just do it, and then we never have to go back and do it. And I would say, especially right now, with what's going on in the country, it doesn't matter anything about how you voted, or I'm going to frankly say even what your opinion is. Because what matters is, there is a deep need to have a unified field of loving agreement for all of us. That everybody can be embraced in that compassion that, in my mind, the Christ consciousness represents. I know for myself, in every life that I've been aware of, it is a continual piece of what we call spiritual work. This is where we get to be a real spiritual warrior for ourselves, to evolve compassion, to evolve kindness out of ourselves. You know, it's like the second coming of the Christ is supposed to be through a group of people, not through one being again. It's to come through as a group of people. So, you know, that would be us, that would be here, and that would be now. So you notice I'm giving you sort of a high charge for your life. But what I know is, all of us have a really wonderful way that we do that on an incremental basis, whether it's doing something kind for a neighbor, whether it's anonymous acts of good. You know, I was sitting in a meeting the other day, and we were talking about, you know, what we are doing to anchor the planet and make it a better place for every life. You can do a lot of anonymous acts of kindness, and that is a way that you're tuning in to the living Christ of your own being. You're allowing it in its compassion and its resourcefulness to be known on the planet. This is how other beings then come to a deeper understanding that there is love on the planet for them. There is caring on the planet for them. There is somebody who's paying attention to them. I don't know about you, but if you go through your daily round, doesn't it make a big difference when you feel like somebody notices you? Somebody pays attention to you? Somebody notices if you're having any kind of a little bit of a challenging time? And I mean, it can be in the most mundane of ways. You know, like, what if you're just trying to get your groceries to the car or something like that? Just kindness for me. And somebody paying attention that there are other beings on the planet looking for more appreciation. A wonderful, when you did that heart-centering exercise, I bring the heart math teachings, that appreciation exercise, and a lot of it into my classes that I teach, so I'm familiar. What that does for us is that it expands us. It's always about, we expand ourselves first. You know, it's always what we do for ourselves affects every life we touch. And that's why doing this kind of interior work can be so absolutely powerful in this time. So when I was contemplating the Christ consciousness once again and the invitation to come here and speak about it, you know, I went right back to my Matthew Fox, which is The Coming of the Cosmic Christ. If any of you have heard of that book, it's a little bit old, but it's good. And talking about the cosmic Christ that is seeking to birth itself, and I would say right here, right now, through us, through each of us individually, and then as we are awake to that living truth of being. You know, think about what it takes to keep something alive. You have to nurture it, don't you? You can't ignore it. You can't just say, oh yeah, that's there, but I don't have to pay any attention to it. We have to notice it. We have to be willing to know it is within us. We have to be awake to it. You know, sometimes these practices aren't always easy, because it means that when we start waking up, unfortunately, within ourselves, sometimes we notice the times when maybe we weren't so compassionate, or the times we wish we could have said something different, or said something. I was having a meeting with somebody the other day, and she was telling me about something that she had to go do. And she was trying to, it was a practitioner session, so she was trying to tell me how she didn't think she always did a very good job. But as the practitioner, of course, I knew that excellence was there, if that makes sense. But we have to notice, where's our attention? You know, a big part, I believe, of all of this, as we get in mindfulness practice, is to notice the stories that we're telling ourselves. What is the story that I'm telling myself is true about my life? Because of course what you know is at any given point, when you change the story you tell yourself, your whole world changes. In the world of quantum physics, when you're standing in one place in the universe, you're telling yourself a certain story, that this is my place, that this is how the universe conforms, that it is not malleable, not changeable, not flexible. But the truth is that when we do an interior practice of mindfulness, of loving kindness, of being awake to who we really are, to what's really going on, when we take that on and allow a demonstration to happen through us, now we stand in a different place, literally, not just metaphorically. We face a whole different direction in our world and in our life. And then what happens is, every life that comes into contact with us, now there's a different relationship that happens. That's how did you know that's how healing happens? That's how clarity happens. That's how an uplifting life can happen. You know, this thing with the country, to me, feeling so divided in so many ways, and this talk I'm giving about allowing the living Christ of our own being to wake up, that we awake to it. It's always awake. But it's all about what we call mental equivalence, and that means my willingness to go deeper, to find more and express more. But it is reminiscent to me of when the tide goes way out on the ocean. You know, actually, I mentioned this last time, I think. If not, I now. I ride my bike. So when I go down the creek, you know, there's a channel. The bike path I go down goes into the ocean. So what do you think? It's the tides come in and they go out. And because I think we're getting into the winter solstice, this time of the year, whatever time of day my husband and I ride, the tide now is further way out down the channel than we're used to ever seeing. But you know what happens is, you see all this stuff that's on the bottom. You see all this stuff that's been there all along. It's been there all along. It wasn't visible, or you could make up that because of all the beautiful water that's there, because the water's gorgeous, and the sun glows on the water, and so it shines, and the birds love it, and there's jumping fish. I had a whole conversation with somebody about the jumping fish. They're great. But the point is, when you're sort of in a certain state, you don't really realize what's underneath everything. Yes?
Yes.
And this is the time, I believe, in this election, and what it brought up, is we get to see, you know, in this teaching we would call that either our subjective or subconscious, what's underneath, now that the tide has gone out. We get to notice what's there. And because I'm talking with you about compassion, I would say, not in a way that we do self-blame, which can be easy to do, like, because we all know we're all one on the unseen side. So if we're really going to take responsibility in a certain way, we know we're all a part of what just happened. There's nobody that's left out of that. You know, unfortunately, that's like the, you know, there's always good news, bad news. That may be, not bad news, but the part of you that says, no, I didn't have anything to do with it. Well, we all do. We all are a part of this great group consciousness, where now there gets to be some real transfiguration. People get to really look at themselves. Where am I? Where am I interested in allowing healing to happen? You know, my great wish for us at this time, and this is what I've actually seen in my meditation in a certain way, and that is, like I said, with the tide going out and this exposure of the beliefs that we may not like, that we may not personally subscribe to, that we may have profound energy, which means deep emotion. Now, all of that can be channeled, by the way. I'm just describing some of the things I've seen come up. But we now have an opportunity to use all of that to bring forth a grassroots, deep, cultural, I want to say, you know, what I've seen in my meditation is this structure that rises up. In my meditation, it's all structures built on light that are real. They're not airy-fairy. They create something that now we can all stand in, that is, as we like to say, a world that works for everyone. But it takes work. And that's the part that I think sometimes people shy away from. And of course, here we would talk about that we do our spiritual work. You know, like I said, the first thing I would talk about is, in a very gentle and kind way, I would invite you to start noticing the stories that you tell yourself. And it can be a little disconcerting maybe at first, because, you know, when you start shining the light of divine awareness on what's moving through you, sometimes you get to see the places where maybe you're a little bit hanging out in what we call a lack of understanding, a limited understanding, lack of limitation, and maybe a sense of separation from the good, from the joy, from real life. You get to start noticing that, so you get to watch your stories. Watch the stories that you tell yourself. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Because as you notice them, but just be aware, you are not that story. That may be a story that you picked up along the way. And the good news is, as I said at the beginning, you can rewrite that story. You can have a whole different ending now. Because now you have spiritual consciousness, now you have spiritual tools, and now you have a wonderful community. And all of this now can be used to rewrite the story. It takes a little bit of work, because usually those stories are based on old structures that are within us. You understand? Like structures of belief about how we think that life is, how life can unfold, what is my part, what is my good, what do I deserve, you know, and if I have this, what does anybody else get? And, you know, it kind of goes out upon itself in that way. So we get to start noticing, where's my story? You know, again, because of the heart map thing, one of the, have you ever seen that video, the I Am video by Tom Shadyac? It's a movie, it's what we just saw in the class. And he talks about his story and how he had bought sort of a certain story about good and about that, and basically stuff. He says having more stuff. He's very famous. He had a lot of money. And then he had a bike accident, which doesn't thrill me to say that. I ride my bike all the time and I've had my share. Okay. But he had a bike accident. He had, I think it was called post-concussive syndrome. He suffered from a concussion that, as he talks about, it's a great movie, you should run it, it's on Netflix. But he talks about that basically, you know, that was the thing that in a certain way woke him up. But what's important to me? What do I want? What is my choice? I could make a choice, because he realized, although he said he'd had inklings, it didn't just come because he had this bike accident. He had had inklings all along. He said, you know, I moved into this house and I don't know how many millions of dollars. He said, I bought a little something in Beverly Hills. You know, there was like, several million, 17 million, I don't know. That was his first little thing he got. I know, it just goes on from there. And he had several homes in several locations. But he said, he said when the movers left, so he stood in, and they had it in the video, they showed it. He stood in this, it was like a work of art, it's stunningly beautiful. And you know, he noticed, he said, I didn't feel any happier than I had before I had this house. So that all was going on even before he had this concussion, which then caused him to really deeply examine his life, because he was pretty non-functional for a number of months. And he just kind of went on a search for that. So you don't have to have it happen that way, but I believe actually we've all had things like that happen. We get to really look at, again, what do I value? What's important to me? What is the story that I'm telling myself that I've accepted as true that may not be true? And it may be that it's not true for me, it's not true for my children, it's not true for my neighbors. You know, the more we discover these fallacies, this is an important point, that as you discover the non-truth of what you have bought into, that it doesn't bring value to your life. When you discover that and you shift where you stand in the universe, I guarantee you, you are affecting many people around you. And I don't mean because you talk about it. Tom Shadyac makes movies, that's what he does. So he made a movie. That's great. Maybe most of us don't. What I'm trying to tell you is, even when you take a different stand in your life and wake up and discover a fallacy, you realize that you've been operating from that. Again, maybe from a sense of lack of self-esteem or something like that. Whatever that may be for you, you can change that. But what I want to really tell you is, in the invisible, because we are all one, that Christ consciousness, when you lean into that, every life you touch will be different. And you may never get to know about it, or you may get to know about it. But it's essential to do that interior work and allow yourself to expand and expand and expand and move forward. Yes? Yes. I'm going to see. I have little to-do things for you, so I just want to look at what they are before I promise it. But yeah. You can look at, I think I just said this, what am I giving my yes to? What am I agreeing with? That's your story. You're looking at the story you're telling yourself. And you know, you can be sure that if there's a place of unhappiness in your life, I would really invite you to go back and examine the story that you're telling yourself. You know, the call to wake up, that little thing that zings you, do you know what I'm saying? That kind of taps you on the shoulder, whispers in your ear, hits you over the head if you don't pay attention. It comes in many ways. So it may be that there's just a sense of discomfort. But when you start drilling down, you can be awake to what is the story I'm telling myself about that? And is that true? Can it shift? It always can shift. But I know sometimes it doesn't feel like it can shift. So that's where we do that interior work about it. Examine the currents of your mind. Notice the trends of your thinking. It's not your individual thoughts. It's the overall trend of your thinking. That's interesting. What does that mean? Does that mean yes or no? What do you think about that? Yeah. We're always in the light.
Jump up and
Was
down.
I going to talk about being the Christ light? There we are. We're always in the light. I think I've been talking about this. To nurture the Christ within, don't allow a stillbirth to take place. The two other things are be willing to be bold in going forward in your spiritual practice. You know, this work is not for wimps. It takes a lot of courage. Because when we start going deeper into all the layers I've been talking to you about, again, you know, we discover stuff. And it's like, how did that get there? Like, I mean, within our own consciousness. And honestly, we're not so concerned about that. That's one thing I like about this teaching. We don't need to figure out where it came from and how it got there. I usually say this to my clients, because if they want to explore how it got there, I'm just not very interested. Because it's not going to serve anything. And I'm very much about, but what's it going to do to shift it? So I always say, I can tell you where it came from when I watch somebody's mind going into that. I said, it came from the whole human race agreeing that that was something that was real, but it's not real. So let's just now move on. Like, real quick. Like, it came from race consciousness, and I mean the human race. So you don't need to investigate to any great length, where did it come from? Because unless it's something you're really interested in continuing with, why would you invest more energy in it? There's no reason to invest more energy in it. Most of us, if we're doing this kind of work, we're interested in doing something different, having a different life, a different view, a new life. So I would invite you to be very bold in your spiritual practice. Be bold in your willingness to accept more of God, more of love, more of joy. I would also invite you to remain teachable. Because when I talk about, in my title, tune into the living Christ, so it's alive, so you've nurtured it. It's not a person who just died on a cross however long ago and has no effect on you. That's an aspect of your divinity. You can call it the I am, you can call it the high self, you can call it the wisdom self. It has many names, the Atman. And it is a living entity that you feed, that you nourish, that you nurture, that you care for, that you love, that you're interested in, that you give way to, so you nurture. And you always let it tell you what's new. And that's the part about being teachable. There's always more to go deeper into. And I don't mean about repeating old patterns. I mean that healing happens, but you know, I still remember the first time Reverend Michael said this. And he said, so you get healed, so what? Then what are you going to do? Because remember, I'm the pastoral care minister. So then I went, wait a minute. I had a little freak out there. So you get healed. So what? It's about then, what can I bring to the planet? What are the gifts that I have to bring that, again, will enliven me? Because by enlivening my heart And what I love, it has intrinsic value for every life I touch. And you never know when you tune in what the living Christ of your own being is going to bring forward for you to investigate, to explore, to find out more about. I will tell you this, it will always be something life-affirming. It will always be something about your beauty, about the generous nature of God. It will always be about your pristine elegance within your own heart and soul. And if when I tell you that, a part of you says, not me, that's a place to do your work. That's a place to do your work. And if when I said to you that the Christ consciousness came, of course, that we may have life more abundantly, and if I said you heal the sick, raise the dead, bring peace to the suffering, and part of you went, oh no, that can't mean me. Yeah, actually I do mean you. Spirit said, this is what we all need to know, be awake to. And I'm telling you, now is the time to do it. It was always the time to do it, but now we can gather ourselves around a divine idea such as this, make it real by planting our feet firmly on the ground in a very grounded way, and finding that our part, it is our part, in bringing the evidence of the living Christ in a way, shape, and form that our neighbors understand it. Right? So not in some going out and talking about God when they don't believe in that. That's fine. They don't have to. But it is imperative, in my opinion, that we embrace and love one another. And in this season, when we're celebrating the birth of the Christ, to celebrate it deeply within our souls, to accept it deeply. You know all the gifts and the presents that we all open? There's something in you. It wants you to open it up. It wants you to share it. It wants you to be the place where all that glory of God is seeking to come forward, because it's you. The buck doesn't pass through here, it stops with you. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
All right. So is it time to pray, yes? Can we do a prayer now? Oh, the ushers come forward. See it, I got the other little different order. So we'll pray in a little bit of this. So I think the ushers are coming forward. Thank you. And you want to take your offering in your hand. You want to remind yourself that you can never outgive God. And you want to, as you think about your offering, the one thing that always, I know for myself that I love, is that I can give because God first gave me life.
Yes.
Physically, of course, mentally, creatively. God gave me conscious life. We get life several times over our life. So God gave me life. God gives through me first so that I may give. So I invite you to do the same. Thank you.